Hey everybody, it's Casey and you're joining me for Business by Design. Design thinking has been around and in the mainstream for about 10 years now. In this presentation, we're going to take a very brief look at how we got there. We're going to examine how to model what we have learned, and we're going to look at how we can then apply that to organizations at varying levels of design adoption. So may not seem this long ago, or it may seem like it's about 10 years ago, but design thinking burst onto the business mainstream in 2008 when Tim Brown, CEO of IDEO, in a Harvard Business Review article, talked about the value of design thinking. And I wonder if any of you actually recall this article. It was a big deal at the time, especially for us designers, because we saw that and we saw the legitimacy that all of a sudden a publication like Harvard Business Review was bringing to the subject of design. So I know you'll all recognize these steps in the process. Design thinking established a process that put customer empathy and understanding at the forefront of its methodology of value creation. And then about a year later, in 2009, Roger Martin, the then Dean of the Rotman School of Business, published his seminal work, The Design of Business book, which cemented the importance of the role of design thinking in innovation and the reinvention of the firm. And even though we're over 10 years on now, if you haven't read this book, I recommend that you read it. It stands the test of time, and he was a very smart guy, way ahead of his time. We're going to hear a little bit more about him later in the presentation. His book outlined the kind of thinking needed to exploit an established business model is not the same as the kind of thinking that you need to explore the new horizons for business. And it introduced the notion in a deeper way of how design thinking might work in that context. And this explore-exploit literature is a huge topic in business academia. And if you're interested in reading more about this, I'd encourage you to look towards the work of Tussman, and that's Tussman. But certainly you would want to start with the Roger Martin book. But you know, in this time, design thinking has not been without its critics. And while this quote by Paula, on one level, can be seen as a harsh indictment, it does underscore the value of the designer in the equation. In other words, while design thinking is an important method for connecting the business to the customer, design and designers can bring it to the next level. So let's just see what she says here. She says, design thinking is not design. Design thinking is to design what the scientific method is to science. It's the steps without the knowledge and the years of training. And design thinking is a real danger because many companies think they're doing design and they are not. So again, you know, I think she gives design thinking a bit of a rough ride here. And I think certainly design thinking is exceptionally important and is often one of the first footholds into a company to introduce it to design. But I think what she's saying here more broadly, as she underscores the role of the designer, is important. And that goes on. In 2015, John Maeda publishes the first Design in Tech report, and it documented the rise of the design unicorns, billion-dollar startups like Airbnb, who were founded by designers, and you know, not the engineers we had previously come to expect from a big startup like a Larry Page or a Mark Zuckerberg. These are the guys that went to school for computer science. That report also documented the consultancy firms starting to acquire preeminent design companies like Fjord. And if you're not familiar, I'm sure you probably all are, but if you're not familiar with this series of reports, I would go back and look at all of them from then till the present day. They tell a good story in their own right. So time's moving on. We're getting towards the present now. And I think it was back in 2013 that the Design Management Institute, based out of England, first had a swag at quantifying the business value of design. And that was a seminal piece of work at the time, but you know, it was also published by a design body, and you might say it could have been seen as partisan in that attempt of a design organization speaking to the business value of design. However, in 2018, McKinsey quantified and validated that thesis when they published the business value of design. They showed that companies in the top quartile of their design index outperformed industry benchmark growth by as much as 1 to 2 times. And that was huge. McKinsey is, if not the preeminent business consultancy out there, it is, at least in the top 3. So this was a huge endorsement of the role of design in how it can bring value to the corporation. But while the value of design report pointed the way with some important guidelines that we see here, and they have a little bit more detail in the report, it did not yet really kind of provide a roadmap for an organization to help understand where it was in its own journey of design transformation, and based on where it is, where to go next, or necessarily even what to do next. So what is the best framework or model for understanding where an organization sits in its adoption of design? And more importantly, what are those things it should be doing to move up that maturity curve to fully extract the value of design? Let's take a look. Design maturity models. Design or user experience maturity models have been around for a while, quite a while actually, maybe about the same amount of time as when we started back in 2010, maybe a little bit before. And while they've been employed to help an organization understand where they are in terms of design adoption, with, all of them have different levels, they've been useful, they've been a good guideline and a signpost. But again, they've not really been prescriptive in terms of helping an organization truly understand what they need to do to move to the next level. So the rest of the presentation I have here starts to readdress this balance. And this notion of design maturity is a research topic for me. And this deck will draw many of my examples from Procter & Gamble, P&G. They were really, in many ways, the progenitor organization that blazed the way with design thinking. And a lot of the people that we know in the field of design thinking, Tim Brown, Roger Martin, who we've already mentioned, John Maeda, they all had a part in that story. And so these guys have been through their own maturity curve. And so they're a really good example for us to look at, to see how they move through it and understand what that looks like. There are a lot of maturity models out there, but based on my research and ongoing research, so this may change at some point in the future, this one is based on the probably almost original Dutch Design Center model, and it draws content from more up-to-date research, as I said, and it starts with no design. So organization has no design. That one's pretty obvious. Stage 2, design is seen as styling. Stage 3, design as process. Stage 4, design is integrated. And stage 5, finally, design is strategic. And we'll explain each of these as we go at each stage, and we'll examine the characteristics of each one. And in so doing, we're going to take a look at what it might take to move between these different stages. So, stage 1, no design. Design is not part of the organization. It is really usually only solely used by marketing and brand, and it's usually activated by engaging an outside agency. So in other words, there are still organizations out there today that have no designers in them. And, design is really just an expertise that is called upon when it's needed, and frankly, most usually by brand. And it's valued insofar as what it can do to help a company form its brand, but it's not really valued in terms of what it brings to the products or the service creation. Or services creation, sorry. Oops. Stage 2, design is styling. Design comes in at the end of product development, and it is considered styling to make it attractive to the customer. I always say, that people, who don't understand designers or design often, they'll hand you something and they will say, hey, can you make this pretty? And of course we can, but that's not really the true value you can get from design. So in these kind of organizations, designers are usually hidden pretty deep within the organization. Design is just for aesthetics, and that design team is probably pretty small too. Stage 3. So you'll see that we haven't really talked about the characteristics much so far, and that's because really there isn't much going on in these companies that's to do with design. But from stage 3 onwards now, we're going to start getting more into the meat of the presentation, and we'll start to see those characteristics that different companies have, in particular particularly Procter & Gamble, excuse me, actually demonstrate. To stage 3, design as process. Design is part of the product or service development process. We begin to see some mid-tier design leadership, and then maybe design thinking. Maybe this is where design thinking makes an entrance and starts to spread within the company. But design is probably still siloed, it's still buried, it's valued, but it's undervalued relative to the value it can bring. So here we are, design thinking. A design thinking champion within an organization can be the first evangelist to start spreading the value of a customer-centric vision to building products and services, and also how to think differently about building them. So, and just to point out here, some people may be thinking, why is design thinking here? Well, design thinking can appear at other stages, and you'll see this with other attributes and the characteristics I'm going to call out as we go through the presentation. They may turn up at other stages, and in turning up at other stages, they may look different. They may have their own level of maturity as they turn up, and this is one of the things I'm addressing on my ongoing research into this whole area of design maturity. We've seen a lot of design thinking process over the years, but really, in my mind, if we're going to draw the design thinking steps, the empathize step relative to its importance would be huge, right? We always see those steps as being equal, but actually, empathy is enormous. And I love this classic quote from the late, great Peter Drucker. He says, "The customer defines the business. It is defined by the want the customer satisfies when he or she buys a product or a service. To satisfy the customer is the mission and purpose of every business." And another great quote here might be this one, which is companies always set out to create something great that everyone will love, but end up with something that nobody will hate. And that's a quote is by Kurt Bailey. And this shows the gap between good and great in the execution of a customer-centric vision. So this stage, it was really the stage that Procter & Gamble pretty much started at. A.G. Lafley, the new CEO of Procter & Gamble, came back from Japan, where he'd kind of learned a lot about aesthetics and the way that Japanese paid attention to detail and product development, and came back into Procter & Gamble. And this is back in about 2001. And Procter & Gamble at that time, if you were to look at its hair care products, all of their hair care products and their sub-brands all used exactly the same bottle. And this was the kind of cost-saving basis that they were working with at the time. Design wasn't any kind of differentiator, and that was the opportunity that Lafley saw. He came in and he said, "We're not going to win by technology alone." They were brilliant. They had brilliant scientists. They had brilliant marketing. You go back and look at the early advertising of Tide and some of the Procter & Gamble, toothpaste brands, and they really were innovative for their time. But design really wasn't present. They were a brilliant science-based company. But that's what Lafley set out to change. And to do that, you need design management and leadership. And he, at that time, appointed the first VP of design, and that was a lady called Claudia Kochka, who we'll hear about a little bit more. And she was actually made a direct report to him. And that was how seriously he took the role that design was going to play in Procter & Gamble. So, while an organization can grow its own internal design talent, hiring a leader with experience in growing a design organization is paramount, one way or another. It's the type of design leader who's able to articulate why design matters, connect that to the business and the return on investment, and be able to believably evangelize the role of design. And part of the reason why is that designers are going to bring a very, very different culture to your company when you hire them. Now, it depends what kind of company you are to begin with, obviously. But they're going to come in and they're going to bring things like Macs with them. They're going to wear jeans. They're going to wear sneakers. Whiteboards are going to pop up everywhere and start breeding. And they're going to create this little design culture bubble that, if nurtured, will spread. So, I recall my first day at SunTrust prior to the merger into Truist, and I'd just been hired as the new head of design, and I was to take a fledgling small design team and turn it into an enterprise team, a fully formed enterprise function. And I turned up first day in sneakers, in jeans. Sure, I kind of had nodded to the establishment. I had a shirt and a jacket on as well, but it was quite deliberate. I didn't ask permission. I turned up that way, and this was at that time into a bank where everyone was wearing a suit, and I did it because I had to see whether SunTrust was going to accept design culture. And I knew that if that wasn't accepted, I really had my work cut out. And frankly, I wasn't sure whether I would want to stay, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to do the things I wanted to do, attract the talent that I wanted to attract, to make the kind of difference that I wanted to make. But they embraced it. I explained what I was doing, and they kind of jumped right in, and then the rest is history. So design metrics and ROI also in this stage. You need to begin measuring the quality of the customer experience, and where possible, it's return on investment. We just talked about that, and that's the role of a design leader, is to start infusing that into an organization. And frankly, metrics and return on investment are a worthy topic on their own of an entire presentation. This is a huge topic in its own right. But the important thing here is that whether you are actually measuring the experience of your products and services, and at what level of fidelity. So a lot of companies will, measure maybe the sentiment towards a particular product, but, especially from a digital perspective, are you in there measuring the value of each feature? Are you looking at how each feature is being used? Are you measuring whether it's fulfilling the hypothesis that you had when you formed that feature about the value that it was going to create? So measuring the experience is incredibly important. Understanding your customers' use of them and their satisfaction paramount. And as that old adage says, what is not measured cannot be managed. And if you're not familiar here with Google's HEART framework and you're curious, you should Google it. But it stands for H. The H is happiness, then engagement, adoption, retention, and task success, which gives you an idea of that kind of mentality of measurement. Design partnerships can also be used to spread design thinking. It's bringing outside thinking into the organization. Procter & Gamble and Claudia Kochka actually formed a design board, I think in the early 2000s, and that had some big names on it. It had John Maeda, who I know is headlining this conference, had Roger Martin, who we've already talked about, Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, and others. And they could come in and talk to executives and talk to them in a way that would help them understand the business value of design, but they could also basically be impartial and look at the organization from that outside-in perspective and see where it was, where it might need to go next, and provide that outside-in perspective. And I think Procter & Gamble would have these guys come in, I think it was 2 or 3 times a year for a full day, and really kind of make use of them in that time. I think they helped design things such as their own design thinking curriculum as they began to spread that through the business. Another attribute that we would hope to see at this stage is the development of multidisciplinary and balanced teams. And if you're not familiar with the term balanced team, a balanced Scrum team in agile software development not only includes software developers, it includes dedicated designers, design research, and it makes it really a autonomous unit fully capable of hypothesizing value, prototyping it, testing it, and building it. And usually that team is actually tasked against metrics maybe around a certain set of features, right? So they're dedicated to those features and improving them. And so they're measuring them, they're iterating on them, and they're doing that as an autonomous value creation unit, because they're almost like a little startup. They have all the constituent parts that are needed to actually go and create that value. Multidisciplinary teams, similar. In multidisciplinary teams, we see the explicit use of different skills, experience, age, ethnicity, brought together to solve business problems. So now we're at stage 4. Design is integrated. Design and design thinking is integrated throughout the organization. It's not siloed anymore. Design research is used to discover unmet needs, incredibly important. Not just using design research or research to validate features under creation, or trying to work out whether those are, this is the best way that we're building this particular feature or product. We're using research now to get up and out and in front and get into the lives of folks, people, to understand their lives so that we can discover those unmet needs. Design is now a differentiator. So here we have design thinking and design management. Coming from the top down, this might be executive teams seated with senior designers. It can mean mentoring of executives by senior design leaders. So for example, Procter & Gamble used to use field trips, designer field trips, where an executive would be partnered with a designer, and they would go out, as Steve Blank would say, get out of the office, and they would go and explore a customer journey or a buying experience. And they would do that together, and they might talk to customers, and the executive would get to see how the designer thought about the experience, how they talked to customers, how they went through that journey of discovery and extracting information that is useful to the design process and improving products and services. And at this stage as well, to do this well, we might see a central design thinking facilitation unit within the organization that can be pulled in either to provide training, it could be provide facilitation, or it might even run projects, or all three. Also at this stage, customer journeys and service design. So, design, it's moved out and it's looking at the entire customer experience across channels for products and services. And service designers and customer journey mapping is used to enable the creation of a better end-to-end experience. So jumping away just for a moment from Procter & Gamble here, think about how Disney orchestrates its experiences in its theme parks. In service design, we have this notion of front stage and backstage. The front stage is the customer experience. The backstage is all the business processes, technology, facilities, and capabilities required to orchestrate and deliver that front stage experience. And the important thing here, clearly, is that the focus ignores internal silos and divisional politics, and it puts the customer experience first. So in other words, you design the customer experience, but then everything is organized behind the scenes to deliver that customer experience. And that's in stage 4. Customer understanding and empathy. So we talked about this a little bit, and remember I said, that first step in the design thinking process is huge. In fact, I've seen teams run design thinking projects and just ignore that first step. Maybe they've used internal experts as a proxy, and that's a good starting place. But if you're doing design thinking, you have to be talking to customers. If you're not talking to customers, you're not doing design thinking. So developing a deep understanding of the customer is, just about the most important thing you can do. And this is the kind of research that can provide the breakthrough insights that can drive new revenue streams. So each year Procter & Gamble conducts a huge amount of foundational consumer research to discover opportunities for innovation. They run something like 20,000 studies involving more than 5 million consumers in 100 countries. Their investment in this kind of research is staggering, and it was something that Lafley, when he became CEO, doubled down on. You know, he just went to town on spending and investing in this kind of research, qualitative research, getting out into customers' lives. And he actually said, this is a quote from him, excuse me, in addition to subject matter experts, for instance, biologists, chemists, marketeers, we brought together outsiders such as anthropologists and behavioral psychologists to give ourselves a better chance of understanding consumers and creating new products and new and better product experiences. This mix of diverse talent is more likely to make the kinds of unexpected connections that deliver real innovation. And P&G Swiffer was one of those innovations. At that time, you know, they were partnering with a lot of design organizations to really kind of understand design from a lot of different perspectives, just like that board they put together, experts from different parts of the design industry. And they partnered with an innovation company called Continuum, who are still around. And they went out and they studied people cleaning floors. You know, and now at this time, the technology for cleaning floors had really reached the peak of where it could go. So the solvents that people were using to put on floors were so tough in their kind of cleaning capabilities, if you like, that Procter & Gamble realized if they went any further down that route, they'd actually be creating chemicals that would start damaging the floors. So they were looking to see where their next innovation could come from. You know, how can they do a better job of cleaning floors? And so they went out and they started spending a lot of time partnering with Continuum. How are people cleaning floors? And they had hundreds, if not thousands of hours of video of people cleaning floors. And, you know, a lot of that video at that time was of people, you know, getting a mop out, putting it in this bucket of water that very quickly became dirty, trying to get the dirty water out of the mop, then putting that mop all over the floor, spreading the dirty water around the floor, putting the dirty mop back in the dirty water. And, you know, some brilliant person had that insight. You know, they just realized that people were actually spending more time trying to clean the mop and keep the mop clean than they were actually cleaning the floor. And that was the genesis of this idea of having something disposable, the Swiffer. And you think about Procter & Gamble and all the scientific expertise they have in like a product like Pampers and these absorbency materials. And all of a sudden they had, you know, the Swiffer. And the Swiffer becomes a multi-billion-dollar product line for them in its own right. And that innovation would never have happened unless they had got into people's lives to get this kind of qualitative understanding. So again, you know, this is why I return to this. You know, this is one slide, but a huge, huge theme if you're going to do this well. Purpose. So, you know, the deep empathy inherent in the approach of design finds its way into the purpose and mission statement of the organization, right? So this is really design spreading. You know, alternatively, you know, you may already be in an organization with a strong human purpose, and in that recognizes design as a vehicle to deliver against those values. Either way, you know, the empathy that's inherent in design, the design thinking process, is really showing up. It's infusing the organization. So I mentioned Claudia Kochka before, the first head of design for and innovation for Procter & Gamble. And she has this wonderful quote. And she says, "Purpose is the starting point to innovation. When companies truly care about their customer, they will be able to innovate." And I think, as we've seen, that makes a lot of sense. Stage 5, finally, we're in the last stage. Design is strategic. You know, the customer is at the center of the organization. And design impacts and plays a part in strategy, exploration, formation, and execution. We might see chief design officers in the C-suite and bonuses linked to customer satisfaction. We would also hope to hopefully see strategic foresight and design futures here. And really that's because in strategy, it's no longer enough to extrapolate historical data forward to reinforce, you know, this official linear narrative about the future. Strategic foresight is a set of tools, methods, actions that can allow us to experiment with the future, make it malleable, play with our strategies, understand how to win in different scenarios. And it can be used to envision possible changes in the environment in order to minimize potential risks and capitalize on new opportunities. So, I think foresight is really beginning to go more mainstream now, but some people still laugh at the idea of the futurist, and I think that those two things can be different, even though we do call strategic foresight practitioners futurists. But there's a huge amount of rigor and methodology and academic nuance behind strategic foresight and how it's executed. So I like this quote from Carl Schroeder here that says, foresight is not about predicting the future. It's not about looking into a crystal ball and trying to think of this kind of one future. It's about minimizing surprise. It's about exploring a lot of different futures and all of those different scenarios and where the world might go. We use STEEP, social, technology, economic, environment, political. We look at all of those dimensions. We look at trends, how they're going to play out over time. And we look at our strategy, and we look at those potential different futures of where things might go, and we analyze our strategy in that context. Is it going to be robust? And, here are just a smattering of organizations, companies that are using strategic foresight, just to really give the idea here that it's a serious subject. So aligning behaviors and incentives at this stage. So this might look like tying CEO and executive compensation to user satisfaction measures. Again, this might also be one that we might see turn up earlier, in a stage 4 or 3 maybe, certainly a 4. And these bonuses really need to make sense. I read an article recently that identified one question an airline used to solicit customer feedback, and that question was, why would you say you enjoy flying with us the most? So hopefully you've already spotted that that's a pretty stupid question to ask, or pretty silly even. These questions and this polling of the customer needs to be and use an effective measurement methodology. It truly has to measure what matters. And the bonus obviously needs to be substantial enough for it to count as a factor in affecting behavior. Finally, the rise of the chief design officer, which is my call to arms somewhat for this role. And McKinsey is actually doing a lot to promote the importance of this role as well in a lot of the literature that they've published since the original report. So the C-suite design officer is somebody who's really responsible for driving the maturity of design in the organization. We've looked at the different stages here. We've looked at some of the attributes of those stages. There are many more, but this is a 30-minute presentation. This person represents the kind of design leader who's a business leader, but they are also a design leader. They have a foot equally in the worlds of business and design. And here we have some examples of some organizations that have chief design officers and play this kind of role within that organization. And we're seeing it spread, where more and more organizations are gradually kind of going this way, seeing the value, whether it's a chief customer experience officer or a chief design officer, and those two things are different things. They're seeing the role that design can bring at the highest level to the organization. So here we are, we're back with a summary of our different stages. Design is styling, design is process, design is integrated, then finally design is strategic. And thank you.